Have you ever stopped to think that the food you're eating every single day might be quietly, I don't know, tipping the scales on your risk for one of the most common cancers out there? Well, today we're going to dive deep into that hidden and pretty fascinating connection between our diet and colon cancer. So, to really wrap our heads around this, let's think about it like this, a metaphor. Imagine cancer doesn't just poof, appear out of nowhere. What if it starts as a tiny, hidden seed growing inside you? That really brings up the big question, right? What is this seed? And could we be watering it without even realizing it?
Well, that seed we're talking about, doctors have a name for it, an intestinal polyp. It's basically a small clump of cells that forms on the lining of your colon. Now, look, most of them are totally harmless, but some of them have the potential to change, to develop into something more. They're the starting point for almost everything we're going to talk about.
And here's why this is so important. Get this. A staggering 90%, yeah, 90% of colon cancers start out as these little polyps. That's a huge number. And what it really means is if you can manage the seeds, you have a real chance to dramatically lower the risk of the full-blown plant, the cancer, from ever even growing. Okay, so before we jump into the food, which I know is what you're here for, let's take a quick look at our own bodies. How might your body be sending you little clues, little hints that these seeds could be there? All right, now I want to be super clear here. None of these are a diagnosis, okay? But they're definitely things to be aware of. We're talking about stuff like unusual dark spots on your skin, maybe around your mouth or on your hands and feet. Or even, and I know this is a bit TMI, but persistent changes in the shape of your stool. Like if you notice grooves in it, that could mean it's having to squeeze past a growth. And of course, a big one is family history. That's always something you need to keep in mind. And another thing people worry about is blood in the stool. Its appearance can actually tell you a lot. For example, blood from something like hemorrhoids is usually fresh and bright red, right? It kind of sits on top of the stool because it's happening right at the exit. But if the bleeding is happening higher up in the colon, that blood has had time to mix in with everything, so it often looks much darker, more integrated. Again, and this is crucial, this is something to talk to your doctor about. Don't try to figure this out on your own. All right, let's get to the main event, the core of this whole explainer. We've established what the seeds are, these polyps. So the big question now is, what foods might we be eating that are actually feeding them? Giving them the nutrients they need to grow. And I'll tell you what, some of these are probably not what you're expecting. First up, we have this wild vegetable. It's often seen as a super healthy, natural, almost gourmet delicacy. But what if it's hiding a pretty significant risk? Yeah, we're talking about fern. So what's going on here? It's actually fascinating because there's a specific problem and a surprisingly simple solution. See, fern contains this carcinogen. It's called pediclosside, and it's most concentrated in those tender little tips. But here's the cool part. There's an antidote, mushrooms. They're packed with selenium, an element that can help neutralize that nasty compound. So the takeaway is pretty straightforward. If you're going to eat fern, just make sure you trim off the tips and cook it with a bunch of mushrooms. Okay, next on the list, a breakfast favorite for millions, the tea egg. I mean, it's a staple, right? And listen, on their own, tea is great, eggs are great. But what actually happens when you cook them together for a long time? So here's the science behind it, broken down. Tea has something in it called tannic acid. Eggs, as we all know, are loaded with protein. Well, when you cook them together, they create this new compound, tannic acid protein. The problem is, our bodies find this stuff really tough to digest. It kind of slows everything down in your intestines. And when motility slows down, any toxins in your system just end up sitting there, pressed against your colon wall for longer. And that can cause some serious irritation over time. So, just to be clear, the problem isn't the egg, and it isn't the tea, it's the combination. The simple fix? Just try to separate your tea and any big protein meals by at least an hour. And hey, if you're looking for an alternative, how about seaweed? It's got these polysaccharides that some research suggests might actually inhibit tumor cell growth. Think about it. A seaweed egg drop soup gives you that yummy egg flavor without that problematic chemical reaction. It's a win-win. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. Up until now, we've been talking about foods that can feed polyps that are already there. But now, let's dig into something maybe even more fundamental. What about the foods that might be creating the right conditions for those polyps to form in the first place? When we think of allergies, we usually picture sneezing, itchy eyes, maybe a skin rash. But guess what? Your gut can have allergies too.
When you eat something that irritates your intestinal lining, it triggers inflammation. And if you keep eating that food over and over again, your gut gets stuck in this constant cycle of damage and repair. And that chronic inflammation is exactly the kind of environment where polyps love to form. A good example of this might be certain tropical fruits. Things like durian or dragon fruit can be high in specific proteins that can set off this kind of reaction in some people. But really, the specific food doesn't matter as much as the principle. The real takeaway here is this: listen to your body. If you notice that a specific food, any food, consistently causes you digestive trouble or sends you running for the bathroom, that's your body screaming, hey, this is an irritant, and that repeated irritation is what we're trying to avoid. Okay, next up, what about those prepared foods? You know, the delicious-looking salads and appetizers you can grab from the deli counter. I mean, they're super convenient, but they might be hiding a risk you haven't bought about. And wow, this next slide just perfectly illustrates the problem. Check this out. An experiment left some prepared foods out at room temperature for just 6 hours. The results are, honestly, they're shocking. The bacteria on the pig's head meat multiplied by 47 times. That is a massive bacterial explosion. And when you eat that, it can completely throw your delicate gut balance out of whack, leading to, yep, you guessed it, inflammation. So what do we do about this? Well, the solution is pretty simple, actually. First off, fresh is always best whenever you can swing it. But look, we all get busy. If you are going to eat prepared foods, there's a super simple antidote: vinegar. That's it. The acetic acid in it is a natural antibacterial. Just adding a little splash to that deli salad can help kill off a good chunk of that bacteria. And finally, let's tackle fat. This chart right here is a real eye-opener. I mean, we tend to think of pork ribs as mostly meat and bone, right? But would you believe their fat content can be as high as 40%? 40! Now compare that to a lean cut like pork loin, which is sitting way down at just 8%. The difference is huge. So why does this even matter? Well, high-fat diets make your body pump out extra bile acid to digest all that fat. And all that excess bile can be a major irritant for your colon lining. So yeah, the obvious fix is to choose leaner meats like that pork loin. But here's another really cool kind of weird tip: frozen tofu. Yeah, you heard me. When you freeze tofu and then let it thaw, it gets this amazing, spongy, porous texture, and that texture is fantastic at literally soaking up excess fat right there in your gut. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on the don'ts and the watch out for this. Let's flip the script and end on a really powerful proactive note. Let's pull all the do's together into a simple polyp prevention diet based on everything we've just learned. And maybe the single most powerful strategy is also the absolute simplest. You ready for this? Research shows that adding just 90 grams of whole grains to your daily diet, that's about half a cup, can lower your risk of colon cancer by a massive 20%. That's it. That is the incredible power of fiber right there. So let's put it all together. Here it is, your polyp-fighting toolkit. A nice little summary of all the actionable things we've talked about. Number 1, get more fiber from whole grains. Add that selenium with mushrooms. Choose seaweed for its awesome polysaccharides. Use a splash of vinegar on those prepared dishes. Try that frozen tofu trick to soak up extra fat. And of course, pick leaner meats. See? These aren't crazy, complicated changes. They're simple things that can make a huge difference. And in the end, it all comes back to that metaphor we started with, the idea of a seed. Every single meal you eat, every day, is a choice. You can choose foods that might create irritation and feed those potential seeds, or you can choose foods that create a healthy, vibrant environment inside you where they just can't take root. Your diet is like a garden that you tend to every single day. So the real question is, what are you going to choose to grow?